Are there any specific cases that you could give an example of in the US where someone has, because of online harassment, someone's brought about harm to another person and then they've been dealt with through the courts? Or
There are a couple cases that are, I think, currently pending in the US judicial system. Most of the cyber harassment laws are newer in the States because they're specifically targeting internet content. So there haven't been that many court cases, to be honest, because in general, the United States has very strong protections for freedom of expression. So we're still seeing kind of how these cases are going to play out within the judicial system. What we're actually seeing more of is kind of the community as a whole taking a response to these incidents. So there have been a couple cases over the past year or two that received a lot of media attention. So Gamergate is one where individuals, usually women within the online gaming community, were targets of significant online harassment that escalated to the point where they were concerned for their physical safety. And those received a lot. They came out to the media and spoke about their experience, and that has received a lot of media attention, which I think has been positive because people are now more aware of the issue, and we see technology companies, people who are using social media platforms kind of getting engaged in this debate and trying to figure out solutions to this problem. Because really what we're seeing is that the best kind of solutions are going to involve different actors, not just the government and not just tech companies kind of imposing restrictions on their platforms, but really involving everyone to find solutions that are going to be the most effective while still maintaining a free and open internet.
I found a story from Reuters about Albany County law was aimed at stopping cyber harassment. And, this law has been challenged that it violates First Amendment rights. Could you explain a little bit?
So I believe it was last summer, the New York Court of Appeals struck down a law within New York State that criminalized online speech related to cyber harassment. The reason that the law was found unconstitutional is because the wording of the law was too broad. So the court stated in their opinion that the way that the law was worded was going to have restrictions on all kinds of speech that wouldn't really fall under kind of popular understandings of cyberbullying or cyber harassment. I think the wording was something along the lines of speech intended to harass or annoy or an individual online, and that could really include a lot of speech that isn't really the intent behind the law, and that's why it was struck down. And that's something that we find kind of worldwide, that governments are struggling to word laws in a way that they'll be specific enough to really target the speech that the law is trying to target. Which is, again, why we find that just a law on its own is not going to be an effective way to really limit the speech that it's trying to address.
And do you think there can be a balance struck between protecting free speech and protecting people against this kind of cyberbullying?
Well, actually, one of the things that we've noticed is free speech and combating online harassment aren't always in opposition with one another. One of the things that has been found to be most effective against undesirable speech is more speech or counter speech. And again, this is one of the reasons why laws proposing restrictions on anonymity aren't going to be effective, because if you're trying to encourage people to counter the negative speech and to actually speak out in defense of someone who's being attacked, they might not feel comfortable doing that if they too have to be using their real name on this online platform. So online anonymity is actually one of the ways that vulnerable groups, marginalized groups, are able to freely express themselves in a way that they feel secure. And that's one of the ways that we can combat speech that is targeting someone unfairly, or things along the lines of hate speech and other content like that.
Some countries have either proposed or introduced laws that restrict anonymity online. What would you say are the pros and cons of, I know you've touched on it already, but
Sure.
What are the pros and cons of these sorts of laws or system?
Restrictions on online anonymity, broadly speaking, are going to infringe on people's right to freedom of expression and their right to privacy. And so, for example, as I mentioned earlier, anonymous speech online is kind of one of the pillars of democracy in this new digital age, where people need to have the freedom to test out new ideas and speak out in ways that might not be popular. And some of that speech is not going to be speech that we would consider desirable, or people might have very strong reactions to that speech. That doesn't always mean that that speech should be restricted. And being able to communicate anonymously online is one of the ways that we can ensure there's still a vibrant debate in the online community.
The sort of laws limiting anonymity online, I'm thinking particularly in places like China, because I know that I think they brought in a law like this in China. In what ways could this be misused, basically, by such regimes?
In certain contexts, restrictions on user anonymity can be used by authoritarian regimes to go after human rights defenders or journalists or other individuals that the government might already want to be targeting and limiting their speech online, or potentially use restriction like this to identify those individuals. We also find that even laws that have good intentions, behind the crafting of the law, they might be used disproportionately on some groups versus others. So some people might be impacted more by limits on anonymity than other groups. Usually groups in the majority might not have as much concern about being able to be anonymous as marginalized groups or groups in the minority. And that can occur, in democracies or less authoritarian regimes around the world.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to ask. Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, great. Thank you.